Never mind. What I'd like to do over the next three-quarters of an hour or so is to show you some examples from a few of the collections that we in the Modern Records Unit are responsible for, and also how the nature of archives has changed over recent years and will continue to change. And I also want to mention some of the legislation that has affected the way archivists work, particularly with modern records, and how we make them available to the public. Now, when I started working in the library back in the early 90s, that's the one, right, there, I've got it sussed now. This is how archivists worked, pretty much the same as they'd ever done. They compiled catalogues, or we compiled catalogues by hand. We sent them off to be typed and bound. The bound copies found their way into the reading room. But now, all of our catalogues are completed electronically. And this is an example of a work form that we use for cataloguing on the library's Virtua system. This actually shows the top-level description for the archive of the Welsh Academy. And catalogues are then made available and searchable online using international archival descriptive standards. And this is the same entry for the Welsh Academy papers as it appears on the library's online catalogue. Now, as Glyn said, my first job in the library was to catalogue the records of the Welsh Church Commission. That was the body responsible for the transfer and disposal of ecclesiastical property after the disestablishment of the Church in Wales in 1920. And I gradually took over responsibility for all ecclesiastical records in the library, diocesan records, central administrative records, and at the time parochial records, until the reconfiguration of the library in 2001 led to the formation of the Modern Records Unit with me as its head. And here's where we sit in the library. We're part of the archival data section, of which Glyn is head, and we all come under the Collection Services Department. So how do we define modern records? Well, basically, they're the records of organisations existing or created in the 20th century or indeed beyond. And this includes the Church in Wales. So we in the unit are in the enviable position of handling material dating back as far as the 14th century in some cases, as well as exciting and challenging new 21st century records. So let's have a look at some items from a few of our collections, and then we'll examine how things have changed over recent years in the archival world of the National Library. And I'll start, just as I did 19 years ago, with religious archives, and in particular the records of the Welsh diocese. Now, the library is unique in Britain in that we act as diocesan record office for all 6 Welsh dioceses. Elsewhere in Britain, it's a single local record office or sometimes a university archive that acts as diocesan record office. We also hold the central administrative records of the Church in Wales, and if you lump all this together, it's probably collectively the biggest aggregate archive that we have in the library. Now, as far as the earliest items from the diocesan records go, they're probably these fragments from an episcopal or bishop's register from St David's in 1397. This particular slide shows a couple of entries, papal bulls from Pope Boniface, claiming supreme power in both spiritual and temporal matters, directed to the chapter and the staff of St David's Cathedral. Now, the diocesan records that we hold contain examples of what you would say were standard diocesan records, the records that you would find in any diocesan record office. Episcopal registers, as we've just seen, ordination papers, faculty papers, visitations, dean and chapter or cathedral records, this sort of thing. But you might be surprised to find that some of the most, shall we say, racy records that we have in the library are to be found among the ecclesiastical records. And these are the records of the consistory courts. The consistory courts were basically concerned with non-criminal matters, dealing with cases relating to a number of topics. They dealt with the probate of wills until 1858. They dealt with matters relating to the clergy and parish officers and professionals, parish clerks, church wardens, this type of person. They dealt with matters relating to the church revenues. A lot of these consistory court papers relate to tithe disputes. And a lot of papers relating to individuals, to parishioners, matters of excommunication, failure to have a child baptised. We've got a lot of papers relating to church seat disputes. A lot of people used to come to blows regarding where they sat in churches. And cases of brawling and immorality and defamation. And it's these last two cases, the immorality and defamation, that are the really interesting and, if you like, tasty records. And these show why the consistory courts were often referred to as the bawdy courts. I'll mention a case of brawling first of all. Cases of brawling were by no means uncommon. In 1721, it was alleged that one William Matthew of Llancarvan in Glamorgan did on a number of occasions play at several idle games and did quarrel, chide and brawl at Rhys Davis, even to the effusion of his blood. But it's the defamation cases that have probably been looked at by researchers more than any other of the consistory court records. Now, again in Llancarvan, there must have been something in the water down there. This time in 1797, it was alleged that Thomas Williams had said to John Thomas, the husband of Joanna Thomas, in front of several witnesses, "Your wife and my wife are two drunken sows. They're two whores." And upon being challenged by Thomas, he replied, "Yes, and I'll hold 20 guineas that I will prove her a whore." Now, Williams failed to attend any of these hearings in the consistory court, and he was excommunicated under threat of greater excommunication. Now, this so-called lesser excommunication, which he was sentenced to, prevented an individual from taking communion or attending divine service, whereas the greater excommunication meant he was excluded from the company of all Christians. And obviously, this threat didn't have the desired effect, and indeed in February 1798, Williams was indeed sentenced to greater excommunication. Now, this slide illustrates a couple of ways in which these records have been used. Firstly, the fact that the evidence was given in Welsh and then translated into English. And these records are being examined by researchers looking at regional variations in the Welsh language. And recently, Glyn appeared on the S4C programme Al Lafar, is that right? Yeah. Looking at some examples of the Welsh from consistory court records in both North and South Wales. And they've also been used in research into how women were referred to in South Wales in the 18th and 19th centuries. And sure enough, it's this term whore that appears time and time again. One of my favourites is a case where two sisters were referred to as a parcel of whores, which I think is a wonderful collective noun. And I certainly won't offend your sensibilities by giving any examples of the use of rather robust Anglo-Saxon language that we find in many of the cases. It's not at all what you'd expect to find in ecclesiastical records. And the clergy themselves weren't exactly blameless. The vicar of St Bride's Major in Glamorgan had, over a period of time in the 1830s, been complained about for, I love this phrase, a moderate use of wine and spirituous liquors. And to this litany of alcohol-related incidents can be added acknowledgements of debt towards no less than 19 different people. Now, I also want to show you some examples of records that are a little out of the ordinary as far as diocesan records are concerned. First of all, the St Asaph Notitii. Now, when William Lloyd became Bishop of St Asaph in 1680, one of his first tasks was to direct his clergy to compile a census or notitia of each township and parish in the diocese. And this particular example is from Micheal in 1681. And you'll see that in the first column there, it lists the names of the householders, heads of household. The second column lists the number of souls, or the number of people in each family. And finally, the ages of all those in the household under the age of 18. The incumbents were also instructed to list the names of all Catholic recusants, those who didn't attend services of the Church of England, as was required by law at the time, and those under excommunication in each parish, as well as details of any money given for charitable purposes. Now, these are the only examples of notitii in Wales. They're an incredibly valuable resource for local and family historians, and of course they predate the first official census by well over a century. And these were among the first records in the library to be digitised and made available on our website. If you look at the website under the digital mirror, there's some nice maps of the Diocese of St Asaph, and you can click to each rural deanery and then down to parish level. They're well worth a look.